Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Duke Wisdom Podcast. Ben McCormick here with Clinton Weaver, where we're going to have a really, really sad conversation. It took a day of mourning to finally get the courage to talk about this, frankly. Duke loses 73-72 to UConn in the Elite Eight, one of the greatest regular seasons and one of the greatest Duke basketball teams of all time, has one of the most unforgettable and heart-wrenching finishes in the history of the sport. A 19-point lead blown. That's the largest by any one seed all time. Just it really, and I think John Shire echoed it in the post game pressers. It was hard to find words to describe this. I may have said some bad words immediately when it happened. Those were my first choice words. Um, I turned the TV off pretty much immediately when it happened. Just shut down. I mean, it was unbelievable. It was one of those things where I woke up this morning and went, "Huh, wasn't a nightmare." Like that actually did happen. There's so many things of the aftermath that I didn't see into this morning, actually, because I just sort of tapped out of everything. Like I didn't want to consume anything about what had just occurred at all. Um, what I will say is just people always say that Duke fans are spoiled, but right now it seems like one of the hardest fan bases to be a part of in terms of how often you get your heart broken. And UConn seems to be about the easiest fan base to be a part of at the moment, in terms of how often they overperform. But it both of those things came together in the worst possible way for Duke basketball last night, and well, here are our reactions. You've heard a little bit from me, Clinton. What were your just immediate reactions to the game-winning shot?
Well, the word brutal comes to mind. Uh, you know, gut punch, incredible, unbelievable. Like what was that? 35-footer, 40-footer, I don't
Yeah,
know. At the logo, at the buzzer. I feel like we got Leitner is the word I came up for it. Just like Christian Leitner did it to Kentucky, UConn did it to us. And now we're going to have to live with that highlight reel moment as one shining moment, probably for the rest of our lives. It was just incredible to go from a 89% chance of victory to a 0% chance in a 5 second span due to one critical mistake. And it's fair to criticize Shire, for end of game management again, just like last year. It's two in a row now. So that narrative is out there, and somewhat justifiably so.
that's a narrative I'm going to want to talk about a little bit more a little bit later. But I think there are two main things we need to talk about for this game. First of all, there is the meltdown, and then there is the final action. Right, for the final action, and that's where I want to start. Um, the whole game, I kept turning around, telling my girlfriend, I was like, I know, like this is. I can put it. I'd put $1,000 on this right now that Alex Caravan is going to hit his first 3-pointer at a critical moment of this game, without question. He did, and he didn't hit the shot, but he hit a really, really important shot. And that last play for me there was a lot going on there. They had timeout. They should have used it, whether it was Shire, whether it was a player. Um, UConn knew what they wanted to do. They knew who they wanted to foul, right? I think there was a bit of a panic to get that ball out of Dame Sarr's hands, understandably so. I'm right there with him. Yeah, there's a lot of blame that can be put on that play. You can put a lot of blame on the shoulders of Caden Boozer because, yeah, he should have held on to the ball. He shouldn't have thrown that pass. But at the same time, John Shire's over there, mimicking on the sideline, basically telling him to throw that pass because Patrick Gongbo, Isaiah Evans, they're down there. They're wide open. You pull that pass off, wide open dunk, game over, right? But that's not a risk you want to take, especially as the point guard. You want the ball in your hands. You've been a pretty reliable free throw shooter. It's a mistake. It's a panic. There's so much happening all at once in that moment. And it felt like every second of that second half led to that moment. It was just tiny slip up after tiny slip up that ultimately resulted in a massive slip up there at the end of that game. And Caden Boozer was very accountable in the post game presser. You really have to feel for that kid, and you got to tip your cap to him for even fielding the questions from reporters. And he said that he felt like he basically ruined his brother's last game and their last chance maybe ever to play together, which is just a heartbreaking thought to have. Um, I really hope that he doesn't hold that against himself because otherwise he played such a brilliant role throughout the ACC tournament and NCAA tournament. He messed up a few times against UConn, and namely, of course, in that last play. But I'm so happy with the way that he's played as a player. That play, it turned out in the most improbable way I could ever have imagined. Really, I mean, it was like every little thing that could have possibly gone wrong went wrong. And with that Braylon Mullins shot, when he got it, it was like my head was still thinking he's going to miss this. Like this is going to be one of those games where they just escape by the skin of their teeth. They don't really deserve the win at this point, but they're going to get it. And about midway through that flight, I just went, "Nah, man, that's money. Like that's good. There's no chance that doesn't go in." It's unbelievable to me that he made it. It's even more unbelievable that he just drilled it. Like there was absolutely no question whatsoever. And it came out after the game that Mullins actually thought that he was shooting to send the game to overtime, which makes it hurt a little bit more for me, honestly, that he didn't even know that he was hitting the game winner. He just had that kind of confidence, especially after he really didn't shoot the ball well all day. And it was kind of both guys. That whole game, I was waiting. I was sitting and waiting, and I was going, when are they going to start hitting these threes? And when they do it, it's going to be game over. And that's pretty much how it played out.
Yeah, they hit a couple of big threes before the one by Caravan out of the corner. Uh, Cam did not close out well. He got caught up in traffic, didn't get out there. Isaiah didn't close out on the last shot, didn't get a hand in his face. And on that last play, I mean, yeah, if Caden's pass clears those hands, it's it's profoundly a good play to not even get fouled and end the game with a dunk. So we were that close, we were a fingertip away. So it's hard to assess too much blame when really that close from being an incredibly smart way to handle the last 10 seconds. Having said that, of course, through the lens of retroflexion, we know it didn't work out that way. And then you start asking Monday morning quarterback questions about should they have called a timeout. Well, at least I got the ball in bounds, unlike last year, and that worked. And to Dame Sar, maybe not. Well, Dame got it in, right? And then Cam kind of fumbled it, got it right back to Dame under our own basket. That was a very risky pass to the wrong guy. Arguably, Cam should not have made that pass at all, but then Dame did a very smart thing to get it immediately out of his hands, knowing that he was a bad free throw shooter. And so for half a second, things are looking good, right? We get the ball to Caden. And, man, you know, we were the sliver of a finger away from putting that game away. It's just an incredible turnaround.
Yeah, I saw there's the immediate outburst of pointing fingers, and a lot of those fingers went to Caden. And then some of those fingers went to Isaiah Evans. You mentioned him not getting the hand up. I didn't even notice that live. Honestly, my brain was as frantic as the players probably was. And I think that if you're Isaiah, there's two things to that. It's one, like everything's happening so fast in that moment that reacting to it is very difficult. But also, you don't really want to risk the possibility of fouling a guy on a nearly half court shot for the win. Like if that shot's not money and you just accidentally tap him or something, you just lost the game for nothing, right? Like he's probably not going to hit that shot. He did, and that sucks. Like in hindsight, but I don't really blame Isaiah. Sure he could have put a hand up, but from where he was standing, I don't really think it would have done anything. It would have just been for show, really. And I think it's crazy the people that pointed it out, like Sports Center or like ESPN posted about it, and that's kind of crazy, right? Like it's not his fault at all in that moment, I don't think. And I don't blame any single person. I don't blame John Shire. I mean, I think there are certain coaching decisions that we'll delve more into that go into this, and there's some sort of systematic trend that has somehow worsened itself. But I don't really. I'm not pointing fingers at any single person. You see how much it meant to these players in the locker room. Uh, I mean, you see the blood on Caden's jersey. You see, Cameron Boozer looks like he got attacked by a swarm of bees. Man, that dude went through hell and back for this team. Um, every one of them really did, and I know how much it meant to each one of them. I'm not going to point fingers because this was more of a team issue, and there were a lot of things that led to that breakdown.
Yeah, all of that is fair. Isaiah was probably as shocked as anybody at what was happening there at the end. Certainly didn't want to risk fouling. And there was plenty of blame to go around. The last play always gets all the attention because it's the last play where the game is technically decided. But everybody knows there were 100 plays that helped decide that game, and a slow motion second half collapse that everyone contributed to in some way, shape, or form. I think one of the most curious stats of the game was that Isaiah only took 6 shots. I'm almost tempted to go back and look at the film. I'm not ready for that yet. But
Yeah.
how did Isaiah only get 6 shots off in this game? That he was such a non-factor. Um, Slipped and made one turnover, but by far was not the only person. And we just had some woeful, uh, inopportunely woeful performances by people like Big Pat and um, Caleb. Understandably, he couldn't pull off the miracle that he pulled off 2 nights earlier. That's completely understandable, but took a team effort to throw away a 19-point lead, and plenty of credit or blame to go around for that.
Well, here's what I'll say about Isaiah. I do think UConn did a really good job on him defensively in the first half. They did a really good job at denying him those looks from three. I'll say that. I think there was a tendency, and we saw it a few times in the postseason, but I think it was especially true on Sunday that it seemed like in the second half, like Isaiah Evans didn't exist. Like if he was on the court, they weren't using him, but there were large stretches where he wasn't on the court. Like I'm looking at the minutes right now. Cameron played 39 minutes. The next most was Isaiah at 29. I'll be honest, I don't understand this. He only had 2 fouls. I don't know why Isaiah only played 29 minutes. And I think that contributed to the fact that he only shot 6 times. Duke needed more from him. He not just like establishing as a 3-point shooter. I think they could have got him going more downhill. He's really good with his pivot on the block, at moving guys, getting them to bite, getting and one plays. That could have been really valuable against Terrace Reed. I do think that he was underused. You have a great point there. But that does bring me to my next point of what got Duke to the point where they were able to blow a 19-point lead. So it's funny because in the first half, I'm feeling okay. Usually, my pessimism is what ultimately brings Duke to victory. Normally, when I'm like, yeah, there's no chance they're winning this game in the NCAA tournament, they end up winning. I felt that way against St. John's, right? I felt that way during the first half against Siena. But against UConn coming in, it's like I had this strange feeling that they were going to be okay. And that's what worried me because I had that same feeling against Houston last year. I had that same feeling against Michigan State in 2019, against Carolina in 2022. And so that's where I knew, oh crap. If I've got that feeling, there might be something to be concerned about. First half happens, and on paper they play brilliantly. They run UConn off the 3-point line. They weathered about 8 minutes of we can't stop Terrace Reed, but then after that it was like okay, we're actually fine because now he's out of the game and nobody else can really hurt us offensively. And then at halftime for about 5 minutes, I was like, yeah, there's no chance they lose this game. Like I dang near went ahead and put the logo up on my big old bracket that I ripped down actually post game because I couldn't stand to look at it. But I didn't, and I went, and then I just kind of sat down for a minute and went, I got a bad feeling about this lead. This feels a lot like the Carolina game, a lot like the Texas Tech game. It's one of those where it's like there's UConn is did nothing right almost at all, and Duke it went a little too well against a team that I know is better than this, and I don't think they're going to lie down and take it. And so Duke's going to have to keep that foot on the gas, and they didn't for like the last 5 minutes of the first half, and that bled over, I think, in significant ways into the second half. What Duke wasn't able to do against Terrace Reed for the first 8 minutes got exponentially worse in the second half. I mean, it really felt like UConn had an automatic score button. Just give Terrace Reed the ball. Terrace Reed, who cares that he's a 60% free throw shooter? He has not been in the NCAA tournament. He has been pretty darn good, actually, from the free throw line. So it was like, give Terrace the ball. He's either going to get fouled and score because UConn got in the bonus within almost 3 minutes of gameplay, which was crazy and something that isn't talked about enough in this game. The fouls called at the beginning of that second half put Duke in a hole that was going to be very difficult to get out of no matter what way you put it. But they had a similar situation against St. John's, and they refrained from fouling for the majority of the stretch of that second half. But Terrace Reed was just like, they couldn't guard him. They couldn't guard him one-on-one. They didn't want to put doubles down because they were committed to trying to take away the three-pointer because they knew that once that started falling, UConn was going to really cement its comeback. But Reed made them look like a bunch of babies inside. It was crazy, honestly. He has a height advantage over Cameron Boozer, though we didn't really put Boozer on him because they didn't want Boozer to get in foul trouble. We know the trend with Malik Brown with guys that are significantly larger than him. It's difficult for him to guard him. This is the game where Patrick Gongba really needed to be there, really needed to step up. He got bullied. He got bullied the whole game. It was like every single time Reed got the ball, I was screaming, put your hands up, Patrick. Like you're the same height as this guy. Just contest it with verticality and be on your way, even if he pushes you toward the basket. But he was constantly hands down, hand checking, fouling constantly, and he just got handled so easily. This is I have no concern saying this was Patrick Gongba's worst game as a Duke basketball player. I think it easily was. Now he's coming back from an injury. I think it's still bothering him. It's still lingering. I think that's obvious. And so that's difficult. And this is a difficult matchup because Reed's been playing out of his mind the whole NCAA tournament. But it was really disappointing that they weren't able to stop what was for 35 minutes a one-man offense. And they let that one man establish so much gravity in that offense that eventually the rest of them followed suit, and UConn was able to take Duke down.
Well, what seemed to be working towards the end of the first half was Cam came and doubled down and blocked a couple of his shots. And I don't know why we abandoned that strategy in the second half because it was working quite well. You know, we did have foul trouble with Pat and Malik both ending up with four, and the whole slew of fouls that happened where yeah, he was manhandling us on the inside, and but the double team was the answer. I don't know why we abandoned that. I don't know why we didn't try our zone, which had been working in every single game. Didn't even try it in this game, so that's a little bit of a head scratcher. And I hate to go back to the last play, but one criticism of that last play was why did you not throw the ball into your best free throw shooter, knowing that they were going to foul? Everybody in the building knew they were going to foul. Hurley was over there screaming, foul, Sar, or Pat. So we get the ball to Sar. But, the guy who's salted away the games for us has been Isaiah. Where's Isaiah? He's way down at the other end of the court. So somebody's got to explain that one to me. I don't get it. So yeah, but yeah, we got eaten alive on the inside. 26 points for Reed, and that in turn opened up those outside threes later in the game.
There's that big concern, and you talked about the trend with Shire of these blowing the leads. That's how Duke lost all three of its games this season, almost in the exact same way, and literally at the buzzer twice. 1 point losses against UConn and Texas Tech, and then of course at the buzzer against Carolina and UConn. And it's the same way, really, that they lost to Houston. last year. So each of their last four losses have been blowing a lead from anywhere from 14 to 19 points in almost the exact same fashion. And what's concerning about it to me isn't necessarily the late game situations where everybody was like, Shire can't close a game last year. That's what we said. I think they proved that wrong this year. They closed a lot of games in a lot of close situations. I think it's the situational context of you've just spent an entire half blowing a sizable lead, a play at a time, and all this momentum and all this anxiety has built up to this final play where it was never really going to go your way. That's just, if you watch basketball, you know that's how it's going to go. Just by watching the trend of the game and the way the players move, and throughout that second half against UConn, I think they embodied what has caused these losses so much. It was like the offense stopped working. Their actions didn't work. And so there were a couple plays early in the half where they would just sort of force things. Like Caleb Foster would drive down low, or Boozer would drive through traffic and they would turn it over. And then once that started happening and they were like, crap, then they just started not running those actions for a few plays. And they started having isolation basketball where they would score every once in a while like that, but it wasn't sustainable. They weren't matching UConn's output because UConn was pretty much scoring on a possession by possession basis. And so they kind of abandoned the way that they were playing. And a lot of it seemed like it was like, all right, Cam's going to have the ball at the top of the key and we're going to wait until there's 10 seconds on the shot clock. So we're going to burn 25 every single time. And we're going to play an analytics game of we're going to burn this much clock and this much clock and this much clock. So we need X amount of stops and X amount of scores. And it's not that many. So you have to be relatively successful when you know you're going to have slippage when the other team's coming back, but you'll probably still win. That's what the numbers say. Um, well, here's what I have to say about that. March has proven that they don't care. March does not care about the analytics, man. That was proven against Houston, and it felt like a similar situation where it was like they were just allowing a comeback to happen in slow motion because they took the foot off the gas and they stopped striking and they were resigned to be struck, but they were going to try to mitigate how much those strikes did. And they were going to hope that they had enough time to where it wouldn't matter and they'd still win the game. And that bet almost paid off, but it didn't. And they can't keep playing like that in second halves against good teams like that. They can't keep having games like this. You have to keep the foot on the gas, man. You look at Michigan, you look at Arizona, the two teams that are the favorites to win the national championship this upcoming week. They don't let the foot off the gas. They're not letting teams come back from these margins. Michigan built a similar lead against Tennessee, and all they ever did was grow it in the second half. Albeit Duke played a much better team in UConn, but Duke came out flat from the first second of the second half, and it felt like they spent the whole time backpedaling instead of trying to find a way to reaffirm themselves and move forward.
I think one of the players mentioned that part of John's halftime comments were to keep your foot on the gas. It's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it. And you're right, the offense got stagnant, and it was a lot of bully ball with Cam driving to the basket, sometimes bouncing the ball off his own leg. And generally speaking, throughout the course of the year, that was one of our less successful plays to give a forward the ball 20 feet out and say, all right, see if you can make your way to the basket without getting it stolen or something adverse happening. We saw it at the end of the Carolina game, play, give Cam the ball, clear out, let him try and make a basket. Didn't work. So, yeah, we abandoned things that were not working for the most part. I did think that Hamenia had a nice game in the second half. He really stepped up. But I think, big picture, we had two injured guys who played like two injured guys, and crying over spilt milk, I know, but if they had not been injured, I really feel confident it would have been a different outcome.
So the last thing to talk about, like in terms of things that actually happened that impacted, I think the conclusion of this game, before we get a little more big picture, was something that happened following that last play, that three by Mullins. Like I mentioned, I turned the TV off. I didn't see this happen live. But this morning I go on social media, I see that Dan Hurley's pretty much forehead to forehead with Roger Ayers with his
Incredible.
coat hanging off one shoulder. And he's giving him the look, and also that the bench kind of exploded off onto the court for a second there, and that's not one of the situations where the clock accidentally hits triple zeros and they have to add more time. It was very clear that there was still time on the clock, and so Duke's radio broadcast called for a technical foul pretty much immediately when that happened. What I'll say about that is they pretty much never are going to call a technical foul on that unless it was absolutely egregious, and it wasn't in this case. They barely wandered onto the court, and they're not going to determine an Elite Eight game on that. There are a lot of people, though, that do believe that they could have determined the game on Dan Hurley's shenanigans. Um, and I'm like, yeah, you definitely could and maybe should call a technical foul on that. Now, what I will say is that I'm not really that angry that they didn't, because at the end of the day, like, they're just they know what this moment is. They know what just happened, and they know it's going to be a much bigger deal if they call that technical foul than if they don't. They can get away with not calling it. They can get away with it. Um, but if they called it, that would be crazy, right? And the backlash on Duke in that game would be ridiculous in so many ways. I think they absolutely could have called that a technical foul. I think there's a world in which they probably should have, because you probably shouldn't let Dan Hurley do that kind of stuff to the officials, man. I mean, that's a horrible precedent to set. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to whine about it and go like, Duke would have won the game if they called a technical foul on that. Like, Duke would have won the game if they'd done a thousand things right. They messed up so many things before that happened that I'm not going to nitpick it but so much. But it is kind of crazy that he did it in the first place, especially on a play that was positive for his own team.
Well, completely inappropriate. Um, Taunting. Isn't taunting a thing? Is taunting only a thing for players and not coaches? He got right up in his face, may have even touched his face. It's hard to tell, but any player does that. I don't care the circumstance. Any player does that, they're getting teed up. Why is the coach not getting teed up? Yeah, I understand the circumstance, and it's huge because it changes the outcome of that game. Puts us at the free throw line for two and the ball, and we're going to win. But that is boorish. It is unsportsmanlike. It's bullying behavior. It reminds me of what Bob Knight used to be able to get away with because he was winning all the time till he wasn't, and they finally decided to rein him in. I don't like Dan Hurley, and it's this kind of behavior that really helps clinch it for me. Yeah, he should have been teed up. I mean, who's going to teach him a lesson? Because it's not just that incident. He's over there on the sidelines being completely inappropriate pretty much the whole game. He's like a Muppet on steroids over there with his mouth running 24/7. Some people say he influenced the game just by, you know, being on the refs nonstop in the first half, and that's why they changed. Maybe so. But that was out of bounds, 100% out of bounds. And I don't really care. End of the game, middle of the game, start of the game. What kind of example are we setting? Are we holding players to one standard and coaches to another? It really bothers me. And I don't like the guy, and this is why. He's totally over the top, inappropriate, out of bounds, stepping over the line literally onto the court routinely. And yeah, Roger Ayers should have teed him up.
There's some context for this, that like Hurley shenanigans have gone both punished and unpunished this season. He, blew up in the Marquette game on March 7th, got double teed and ejected. Team lost the game because of it. Um, and that was in the final second of the game, right? So it's not like there is no precedent for them assessing technical fouls on Dan Hurley in the final second of a game. They literally did it less than a month ago. But Sweet 16, right? He takes off his glasses, hands them to the ref, right? Like a ridiculous bit that, for as funny as it is like that's really disrespectful and deserves a technical foul. He did that against Michigan State, receives no technical foul for it. And then the same situation against Duke, receives no technical foul for it. I think the context of them being tournament games is why. I think the context of these aren't the officials that necessarily are seeing him game in and game out in the Big East. I mean, some of them do obviously officiate some of UConn's games during the season. Um, but I think a lot of those Big East officials, especially, they get kind of fed up with him. But when it's in the tournament, I think they're more inclined to let him slide, and I don't love that. I don't love that because I do think it is a really dangerous precedent to be like, yeah, you can just do whatever you want, but because you made this really big shot, you had this big moment, so now you're invincible, and that's a pretty bad precedent to set. Um, I do think that what he did warranted a technical foul, but it's not going to be my blame for the game. Ultimately, that was Duke's own doing in 1,000 different ways. Um, but let's look at. I want to look at UConn from like a historical perspective for a second because Duke has been the most hated team in college basketball for decades, really since Christian Laettner. Um, and it started with those back-to-back championships that Duke won. They had these miracle moments, and then they went back to back, and then they made it back to a championship 2 years later in '94 and lost. UConn's kind of echoing a similar trajectory right now, where they went back to back in 23, 24. They're making it back 2 years later. They're in a position, a really good position, to potentially beat Illinois and make it to the championship game. Where I don't love their chances, but UConn pretty much defies all logic come March and April. In fact, the last time they lost a game post first weekend is when they made the Final Four in 2009. That is the only time they have ever lost in the Final Four. This is UConn's eighth Final Four. In their previous seven, they have won the national championship 6 times. They have won every second or third weekend game they have played after 2009. Seriously, that's an unreal statistic to me. People talk about Duke's the luckiest. Duke gets the calls. Everything goes Duke's way. If you want to talk about who's the luckiest, most spoiled program in college basketball, it is unequivocally UConn. You want to talk about who is the team of the 21st century? It's UConn. I don't really understand why Duke is still the villain and UConn is not at this point. Frankly, Duke has a young, pretty likable coach who's replaced the guy that everybody hated, right? They don't have a villain player on this roster. Uh, there's no real reason to hate Duke other than the fact that your dad might have hated him and you were told to hate him as a kid, right? But UConn is the team that, like, traditionally should be warranting all the hate. Like, everybody should hate UConn because they're the team winning everything. And in sports, everybody hates the winner. They hated the Patriots. They hated the Cowboys. They hate the Chiefs, the Yankees, the Warriors, the Lakers, the Celtics, whoever it is. That's who Duke was in the early 90s. And that bled through to the 2000s. And that's why people hated him. And then they had a coach that everybody wanted to hate. UConn has a coach that everybody wants to hate, right? You said it pretty well on this episode. Dan Hurley, not a particularly loved head coach. And they have a early 90s Duke aura going on right now where they might not be the most talented team in the country in a given year. Duke certainly wasn't in 91, but they won the title. UConn is definitely not the most talented team this year, but they got a chance at winning the championship. They weren't the most talented in 14. They were far from it in 14, in fact. Far from it in 11, you know? But time and time again, is it, and I don't know why people aren't making UConn the ultimate villain of college basketball because there's so many reasons to make them that ultimate villain, and they seem immune to that criticism, and they seem almost immune to losing. It's an unreal pattern that UConn has established that doesn't make much sense to me.
Well, yeah, they've been wildly successful, and you have to tip your cap. They got 6 titles, right? We have 5. I think, historically, we became the villain first. It happened with Leitner in the early 90s. And then they came along and knocked us off in a couple of times, big time, 1999, 2004. And when you knock off the villain, you're not the villain. You're the hero. So we were there first. We were the villain. We're kind of like the New York Yankees. That's a good comp for us because we've done so much winning, but it's also winning from a long time ago that created a lot of legacy hatred that lives on to this day. Of course, with the Carolina rivalry, it's built in. But UConn, they're like the young upstart who came along and knocked us off our perch three times now, and in big time games, and they they just win, right? I don't think they're going to win this tournament. I'm very much looking forward to that. I hope it's on Monday night, and I hope it's in some sort of heart crushing fashion. That would be really, really nice. I hope Hurley gets teed up and thrown out. That would be even better. Um, but yeah, I mean, they're working on being the new public enemy number one. They're making progress. Maybe one more title, and they'll be there. I don't know, but they're definitely a blue blood. You can't call them anything but a blue blood. They qualify. You know, people say Carolina's on the way out. Well, UConn is definitely on the way in.
I think they're more than just in. I mean, they're the top of the chain at this point because the argument was that they didn't have sustained success, that they were just one hit wonder after one hit wonder. That's not really an argument anymore. Three Final Fours in 4 seasons with the opportunity to win three titles in 4 years. Like I said earlier, I don't expect that to happen. I do kind of think Michigan Arizona is the de facto national championship. It would take a miracle for UConn to beat either of those teams. I have been saying throughout the tournament that if you don't want to see Arizona or Michigan win the national championship, Duke has to be the team to get out of the left side of the bracket. I really did believe they were the only team that could win against either of them. I still believe that. I don't think the winner of Illinois or UConn has a ton of chance, especially if that team that they're playing is Arizona. Arizona has just been, I mean, they've looked unbeatable, but Michigan has built and built and built throughout the tournament, and they look better and better by the round. That's going to be a phenomenal game on Saturday. But it's disappointing, just as it was last year, to look at what that championship game will be and know that Duke's not going to be in it when really they should be. Um, that's and it's just heart wrenching loss after heart wrenching loss. Um, here's where I want to end today's conversation on. There are criticisms of John Shire that we mentioned early. And obviously, we had this conversation a lot last season too, where it was like, John, how much of this can be laid? How much of the blame can be laid at his feet? Right? Should he have called a timeout on that last play? What is he doing from a coaching perspective to stop these second half collapses when Duke has these sizable leads against good teams? Right? And then there were even people that I saw have the sentiment that was like, Shire's done a great job, but like the pressure is high at Duke, and next season the pressure could be as high as it has ever been. And within 3 years, if he can't produce, you might have to start having conversations about the guy. I want to push back against that. I think that this is a guy that bleeds Duke blue. He has been remarkable, absolutely remarkable in his first 4 seasons. So many coaches take 10, 20 years. Coach K took 11 at Duke, and Dean Smith took like 20 at Carolina. Roy Williams took just shy of 20 years to win his title. So many of these great coaches, Jay Wright took a long time. It takes such a long amount of time. Some coaches are lucky and they win them early. And John Shire has had opportunities to have been one of those coaches that wins one early, but he hasn't been. He's learning through the process. It's frustrating right now because it feels like it's the same process. And it feels like Duke's, even though they're falling short, they're not falling short in the right places. Like getting to the Elite Eight feels like that's not even quite where you want to fall short. Like this team should have at least made it to Monday probably before it lost and wasn't able to get it done. It's frustrating. It is. I get it. But it takes time. It's difficult. Winning national championships feels so good for a reason because it's so difficult. There are a lot of criticisms to be levied against John Shire. There's some that you can talk about, and there's some truth, there's validity to them. There are things he needs to work on from a coaching perspective, but I don't think any of it is glaring enough for us to lose confidence in him. I still have 100% confidence that he is the man that will deliver a national championship to Duke, and he will do so, I think, sooner rather than later.
I agree with you 100%. He represents the university and the program with complete class, even more than Coach K in the press conferences. Totally respectful towards the press. He's the right man for the job. He's proven that. He's accomplished great things already. Um, 3 ACC titles in 5 years, and a Final Four and 2 Elite Eights. Incredible success. So my criticisms are intended to, help elevate his level of success. But I often think about Coach K. He won 5 titles in 42 years of trying. Okay, that's a 12% success rate. That's pretty crappy, isn't it? 5 in 42 years. I mean, why wasn't that guy fired? And yeah, we revere him today. But I can tell you, in the early years, when we were getting to the Final Four and not winning, it was like, can this guy close the deal? I don't think he can. He lost in 86. He lost in 88. He lost in 89. He got blown out by 30 in 1990. This guy cannot close the deal, right? We're just consigned as Duke fans to the fact that we're never going to win the national championship. That's what it felt like, especially after that 30-point blowout. It's like, okay, it's just not going to happen. We're going to be always a bridesmaid, never a bride. Well, and how do we think about Coach K today? 180 degrees at the other end of the spectrum, because he had a 12% success rate in getting to the promised land. So, yeah, let's cut him some slack, give him some time. He's doing a fantastic job. No question about it. Look at at the programs around us. Look at what's going on at State and Carolina. They're in total, complete chaos and turmoil, hiring and then losing guys who send emails as their means of escape. We're in really good condition by comparison. So, yeah, I don't mean to convey anything other than complete support. He is the right man for the job, and he's doing a great job.
Well, yeah, people want to talk about Duke just had Cooper Flagg and Cameron Boozer, both National Player of the Years. They couldn't get it done. Well, first of all, I want to mention the actual rate that NPOIs win the national championship is rather low. Like Leitner did it in 92, and then it didn't happen again until Battier in 01, and then Anthony Davis in 2012, and Jalen Brunson in 20. Hasn't happened since. That doesn't happen very often. Not to mention, Coach K had Johnny Dawkins and Danny Ferry, 2 National Player of the Years, before he won the title. He fell short with both of those guys. And another point I want to make, national championship teams aren't always the best teams. 1991 and 2010 on paper were not amongst the 5 best Duke basketball teams of all time. I don't really think there should be any reservation in saying that. The 99 Duke team is unequivocally in the top 5. They did not win. I think last year's team could be a top 5 Duke team of all time. They didn't win. I think this year's team has an argument for top 5, but is without question top 10. They didn't even make the Final Four. That's just how it is. It's hard to win. It's going to be hard to win. This is a hard pill to swallow amongst some of the most difficult. But it's time to reload and see where the offseason takes us. And that's what we're going to talk about on Thursday's episode. And we're about to record that right now. But for now, thanks so much for listening. As always, we appreciate you coming here for our joint therapy session. I know that there are probably so many of you that need something to listen to, some sort of optimism to let you know that it'll be all right. You're getting heckled by Carolina fans at work. You're getting heckled by Carolina fans at school. Just know that there are others like you. We're hurting. We know what it feels like, but we know that there is a rainbow on the other side of this, and there will be a day where Duke calls itself national champion again. It is not today. It will not be Monday, April 6th, but that day will come, and we'll be there for it. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Duke Wisdom on Instagram and Twitter. Subscribe to the podcast wherever it is you are listening, and we'll talk to you guys later.